Please be seated. When many people in America and around the world hear peace through strength, they immediately think of Ronald Reagan. And that's fair because it was one of his guiding principles, but it was not his original idea. Some may say we should trace the concept all the way back to the Roman Empire, but let's fast forward to America's founding. In January 1790, President George Washington said this in his has become a bipartisan tradition, an American tradition. It's one of the reasons why that at 10 of the 11 annual Reagan National Defense Forums, widely regarded as the preeminent international defense gathering in the world, we have welcomed the sitting Secretary of Defense. And this year, we're honored to welcome Secretary of War Pete Hegseth. It is clear that peace through strength has been a guiding principle for Secretary Hegseth, the department he leads, and the Trump administration as a whole. Now, this is the first time that the Secretary has been here as the leader of the Pentagon, but it is not his first time at the Defense Forum. And in fact, as I thought about his keynote address this year, I remembered something he said back in 2018. Quote, "We cannot forget that our military is ultimately what undergirds our strength and our ability to project it." That sounds to me like restoring deterrence with peace through strength. So, Mr. Secretary, thank you for your leadership. Thank you for joining us today and for joining your predecessors in the finest tradition of the Defense Forum. Ladies and gentlemen, to deliver the 2025 Reagan National Defense Forum keynote address, followed by a conversation with Lucas Tomlinson of Fox News, please welcome the United States Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth.
Well, thank you, and good afternoon. You know, folks in Washington like to invoke President Reagan's name often when they criticize President Trump. They say, or at least insinuate, that Donald Trump is nothing like Ronald Reagan. They say the current president's approach is nothing like the vision championed by Ronald Reagan at the height of the Cold War, as we grappled with the Soviets and ultimately prevailed. But those folks are wrong. They're dead wrong. Most who invoke Ronald Reagan's name today, especially self-styled Republican hawks, are not much like Ronald Reagan. The policies they've championed are nothing like his. In fact, for the better part of 30 years, they've been quite the opposite. If you look at actual policies, Donald Trump is the true and rightful heir of Ronald Reagan. It's President Trump who has inherited and restored President Reagan's powerful but focused and realistic approach to national defense. It's therefore only fitting that we gather at the Reagan Presidential Library today to talk about President Trump's America First, Peace Through Strength, Common Sense agenda and what it means at the Department of War. One need only look at the results to understand why President Trump is that rightful heir. So let's look at what Reagan and his administration actually did. Reagan rebuilt the military after Vietnam, and that is rightfully considered one of his greatest achievements. President Trump has done and is doing the same, making historic investments in defense. But President Reagan also believed sincerely in the peace part of peace through strength, as his actions showed. It was not a popular thing to do at the time, at the height of the Cold War, to talk to communists. Yet President Reagan did. During his high-profile meetings with Mikhail Gorbachev and others, Ronald Reagan saw the prudence and potential in engaging with our nation's adversaries from a position of strength. So he did, even in the face of fierce criticism at home, including from his own party. Now, President Reagan wasn't naive. He recognized that fruitful engagements with our adversaries were only possible from a position of strength, especially military strength, which is why he focused so much on building up the American military. We still talk about the Reagan buildup, and my kids and yours will someday talk about the Trump buildup. President Reagan and his team inherited a military worn down from their generation's endless war in Vietnam, and they took the lessons of that war to heart. This is why he was so deliberate in how he used the joint force. Indeed, the most famous military doctrine of the Reagan administration, named for his Secretary of Defense, Caspar Weinberger, was specifically designed to correct for the failures that led to Vietnam. Among other key principles, the Weinberger doctrine stipulated: 1, the United States should not commit forces to combat unless the vital national interests of the United States or its allies are involved. 2, U.S. troops should only be committed wholeheartedly and with the clear intention of winning. Otherwise, troops should not be committed. 3rd, U.S. combat troops should be committed only with clearly defined political and military objectives and with the capacity to accomplish those objectives. And 4th, the commitment of U.S. troops should be considered only as a last resort. This is sound stuff. And it was reflected in how President Reagan actually used the American military, namely in a focused, decisive manner, and only when he determined that it was in our nation's vital interest to do so. In fact, throughout his time in office, President Reagan only committed U.S. ground forces twice, in Grenada and in Lebanon. Otherwise, he focused the joint force on the Cold War-era threat and priority theater, Soviets in Europe. That's how President Reagan achieved peace through strength, always with a clear eye toward lasting peace. Suffice it to say, Ronald Reagan's disciplined, focused, and realistic approach was a far cry from the grandiose, nation-building, moralistic, and rudderless wars that many of his self-described acolytes led us into in the decades after Reagan left office. Wars my generation fought in. Indeed, it's only under President Trump's leadership during his first term and now that we've been able to restore America's greatness after years of suffering under the so-called bipartisan consensus, which is really just a euphemism for disastrous foreign policy. Out with utopian idealism, in with hard-nosed realism. To be specific, Ronald Reagan taught us the value of focused, powerful leadership, but his so-called disciples didn't heed that lesson. Since the end of the Cold War, a generation of self-proclaimed neo-Reaganites have touted Reagan's name, but didn't govern like him. All the bluster, none of the clarity. That's especially true in the military realm. This generation of self-proclaimed neo-Reaganites abandoned Reagan's actual wise policies in favor of unchecked neoconservatism and economic globalism. In economics, they dismantled our industrial base, shipping it overseas. At the same time, in diplomacy and defense, they swore off the clear-eyed, flexible realism of Reagan, Nixon, and Eisenhower. Instead, they set about trying to make America the policeman, the protector, the arbiter of the whole world. Democracy for all, they say, even in the Pesh River Valley. Even when people don't want it, can't do it. They turned American allies into dependents, all but encouraging these nations across Europe and around the world to free ride while we subsidize their defense with U.S. taxpayer dollars. These self-described neo-Reaganites sought global military hegemony under the auspices of peace through strength. Instead, we got rudderless wars in the Middle East, land war in Europe, and the economic rise of China. After presiding over such a poor performance, it's remarkable that these people still think they're qualified to speak in public, let alone moralize to the rest of us. Some of them have even been awarded for it on this very stage. But President Trump knows better. He knows what it means to restore peace through strength on an enduring basis, to put our nation's interests first and the American people first in a way that is practical, applicable, and common sense, that leaves, importantly, America better, but also leaves our allies better off. It's the vision that he ran on and led on in his first term, and he's building on it now in his second. It's a vision, not the quasi-imperialist delusions that led us to so many disasters in the recent decades, that will actually bring us back to the true legacy of Ronald Reagan. Out with utopian idealism, in with hard-nosed realism. Just look at the facts. Like President Reagan, President Trump is dedicated to both sides of the peace through strength coin, not just using that phrase as a thin veil for warmongering. In less than a year, President Trump has secured 8 major peace deals, including a historic end to the war in Gaza. And he's not finished yet. Even as we speak, under the president's leadership, we are working tirelessly to end the tragic war in Ukraine, a war that never would have started in the first place if he had been president. The world sees an entirely different America today. These historic opportunities for peace are not happening by chance. It's President Trump's vision and determination. Like President Reagan, President Trump is willing to talk to rivals, from Mikhail Gorbachev to Deng Xiaoping in the 1980s to Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping today. This is born of strength, not weakness. It is born of clarity of purpose. Folks in Washington like to criticize President Trump for doing so, but those critics forget that this is exactly what Ronald Reagan did, and America was better off for it. Like President Reagan, President Trump also knows how important it is to negotiate from a position of strength, especially military strength. And at the newly renamed Department of War, thanks to President Trump's leadership and to Congress, we received a historic boost in funding last year and believe that is only just the beginning. Make no mistake about it, President Trump is hell-bent on maintaining and accelerating the most powerful military the world has ever seen. The most powerful, the most lethal, and American-made. The arsenal of freedom. We're also restoring the warrior ethos back to basics: readiness, accountability, standards, discipline, lethality. I'm not sure if you saw, but I recently gave a speech on that topic to a few generals in Quantico. The War Department is the sword and the shield of peace through strength. We are the Strength Department, and we stand ready to wield that sword as President Trump directs. The opposite of peace through strength is war through weakness. Wokeness, weakness, and war. All specialties of Joe Biden and Lloyd Austin. The debacle in Afghanistan, a stain on our country and a sin committed against the troops. The weakness that unleashed Islamist war against Israel on October 7th. And that same weakness invited war in Ukraine. And Vladimir Putin saw the open door and he took it. Spy balloons flying over our country and SecDefs going AWOL for a week. Wokeness, weakness, war. You know, I was recently tempted when the discussion went out about hitting drug boats to use the phrase righteous strike. But then my team counseled me against it and said, "Sir, that's the phrase that was used by Mark Milley when a family of Afghans was struck as a response to what happened at Abbey Gate. They called it for 2 straight days a righteous strike, when they would have known within hours exactly what they struck." weakness, wokeness, war. It's a new day. With Operation Midnight Hammer, the world saw, after decades of hemming and hawing, the decisive effect of American military strength in obliterating the Iranian nuclear program. President Trump said they can't have a nuclear bomb, and he meant it. Others have said it. President Trump did it. This operation was a textbook example of the Weinberger Doctrine in action. Decisive, focused, applied in a focused, clear-eyed way that advanced our nation's interests while avoiding another protracted war. Same goes for our limited but lethal actions against the Houthis in Yemen. Joe Biden tolerated the targeting of U.S. shipping. President Trump restored freedom of navigation, another foundational and core national interest. Somewhere, Thomas Jefferson is smiling. And right now, the world is seeing the strength of American resolve in stemming the flow of lethal drugs to our country. Here, again, we've been focused, and here we've been clear. If you're working for a designated terrorist organization and you bring drugs to this country in a boat, we will find you and we will sink you. Let there be no doubt about it. President Trump can and will take decisive military action as he sees fit to defend our nation's interests. Let no country on earth doubt that for a moment. Like President Reagan, President Trump knows how to do so in a way that is tied to a clear purpose with a decisive and credible theory of military victory. Just as the lessons of Vietnam informed Ronald Reagan and his Weinberger Doctrine, so too the lessons of Iraq and Afghanistan guide President Trump and his secretary today. For years, a bipartisan consensus of neoconservatives and liberal internationalists led us from one disaster to another. They sent our nation's sons and daughters to war after rudderless war, even as they allowed our allies to grow weaker and our potential rivals stronger. From the very beginning, nearly a decade ago, President Trump called this out for what it is: stupid. An America last foreign policy. And they fought him for it. They tried to jail him for it, and they failed. Well, their time is over. Their America last bipartisan consensus is done. It is finished. Under President Trump's leadership, after decades of disastrous decisions by this nation's self-appointed so-called foreign policy elite, we're once again putting American interests first. We're prioritizing our nation's security, freedom, and prosperity, our citizens. As laid out by President Trump, we're doing it in a way that leaves not only our nation better off, but also the world. Out with utopian idealism, in with hard-nosed realism. The president's approach is one of that flexible but practical realism, common sense, if you will, that looks at the world with a clear-eyed perspective, essential for serving America's real interests. The approach is informed by strategic rationality and cost-benefit assessments. We will define our vital interests in ways that are reasonable and that make sense to ordinary Americans. This is the approach and mindset that shapes the department's focus. As a result, the War Department will not be distracted by democracy-building, interventionism, undefined wars, regime change, climate change, woke moralizing, and feckless nation-building. We will instead put our nation's practical, concrete interests first. We will deter war. We will advance our interests. We will defend our people. Peace is our goal. And in service of that objective, we will always be ready to fight and win decisively if called upon. As part of this mission, we are asking American taxpayers to fund the world's greatest military. We're asking mothers and fathers across America to trust us with their most precious resource, their sons and daughters. And we will honor their trust and their sacrifice. The historic recruiting and retention numbers of President Trump's first year show who the American people trust. This means we will not send America's best to advance foolhardy or reckless adventures halfway around the world. It also means not asking them to pick up the tab for allies who should fund their own defense. Instead, and above all, it means that we only ask our warriors to fight for things that make America and Americans safe, free, and prosperous. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Nothing more and nothing less. Again, this is common sense, and that's what President Trump's War Department is all about. This common sense approach means prioritizing 4 key lines of effort at the Department of War. First, defending the U.S. homeland and our hemisphere. Second, deterring China through strength, not confrontation. Third, increased burden sharing for U.S. allies and partners. And fourth, supercharging the U.S. defense industrial base. As we apply President Trump's approach to flexible realism, the first 2 lines of effort are the primary operational focus of the Joint Force, for the simple reason that these missions matter the most for safety, freedom, and prosperity of Americans. At the same time, however, other threats persist around the world, including in Europe and the Middle East. We cannot ignore them, nor should we. That's why our approach also prioritizes burden sharing and burden shifting. Indeed, for the first time since Reagan's era, allied and partner burden sharing is no longer an afterthought or a nice to have. Today is a core element of our national defense. And finally, the 4th line of effort, maybe the most important, supercharging America's defense industrial base, underwrites everything else. Last month, I gave another speech in Washington, this time to defense industry leaders, to announce a department-wide, not reform, a transformation of requirements, acquisitions, and foreign military sales. Our objective is simple, if monumental. Transform the entire acquisition system to rapidly accelerate the fielding of capabilities and focus on results. The bottom line is a historic, generational, and transformational changes that we will implement and will move us from the current prime contractor-dominated system, defined by limited competition, vendor lock, cost-plus contracts, stress budgets, and frustrating protests, to a future powered by dynamic vendor space that accelerates production by combining investment at a commercial pace with the uniquely American ability to scale and scale quickly, all at the speed of urgency. That speech stands on its own. So I'll spend the balance of my time here talking about the other 3 lines of effort, the first of which are defending the U.S. homeland and hemisphere. The Biden administration was more concerned about Ukraine's borders than our own. They tried to make it controversial to say that border security is national security, but that is, of course, absurd. Border security is national security, and we are prioritizing it accordingly. Since January 20th, at the direction of President Trump, the Department of War has made it a top priority to defend our nation's borders, to get 100% operational control of that border. We did so by surging forces, where our troops partner with DHS and CBP to seal the border. Under Joe Biden, tens of millions of illegals, and we have no idea where the hell they came from or where the hell they are, flowed across our border, not to mention lethal narcotics responsible for the death of hundreds of thousands of Americans. Today, the number of illegals crossing into our country is 0. We are saving lives and communities, and we are keeping it that way. We're also proud to support our law enforcement partners as they conduct mass deportations of dangerous illegals who have no business being in our country. We'll secure the border in part by organizing, training, and equipping units specifically for border defense missions, including operations in the land, maritime, and air domains, alongside our interagency partners. We're also leaning on our Mexican counterparts to do more. They have made progress and will need to see more, and quickly. And so far in this administration, nobody has built more new border wall than the Department of War. But our borders shouldn't be the first line of defense for the American homeland. They should be the last line of defense. And that's why we're prioritizing our fight against cartels throughout the Western Hemisphere. You can just look at the news. Not all of the news. The days in which these narco-terrorists, designated terror organizations, operate freely in our hemisphere are over. These narco-terrorists are the Al-Qaeda of our hemisphere, and we are hunting them with the same sophistication and precision that we hunted Al-Qaeda. We are tracking them, we are killing them, and we will keep killing them so long as they are poisoning our people with narcotics so lethal that they're tantamount to chemical weapons. And we're not doing this on our own. Throughout our hemisphere, our allies and partners recognize that these narco-terrorists threaten them as well. So we're working together, sometimes overtly, sometimes not, and we'll keep doing so for the sake of a safer, secure, and more stable hemisphere for all of us. But make no mistake, where a country cannot or will not do its part, then we at the Department of War will always be ready to take decisive action. In this hemisphere, in our hemisphere, there is no safe haven for narco-terrorists. Securing the border does not mean we're losing sight of other critical homeland defense missions. On the contrary, we're doubling down. One of the first executive orders signed by President Trump was for the creation of Golden Dome for America, a revolutionary approach to defend our nation from advanced aerial threats. And we're accelerating efforts on that right now. And Golden Dome will produce tangible protection for this country inside the time frame of this administration and beyond. President Reagan promised SDI, Strategic Defense Initiative. President Trump's doing the same thing. Now the tech is caught up, and we can actually build a Golden Dome for America, a game changer. At the same time, we're also rapidly strengthening our nation's ability to deter and defend against cyber attacks on Department of War and dual-use targets, including through the most comprehensive overhaul of U.S. Cyber Command since it was started 15 years ago. Nor have we lost sight of the threat of global jihadism. As with narco-terrorists, working alongside our partners in the IC and other agencies, as well as partners abroad, we will continue to hunt and kill Islamist terrorists with the intent and ability to strike our homeland. All of this, of course, rests upon the power of our nation's nuclear deterrent, which is the foundation of our nation's defense. Nothing else matters if we don't get this right, and so we will. As President Trump has said, we will modernize our nation's nuclear triad. We will develop additional options to support deterrence and escalation management, and we will never allow this nation to be left vulnerable to nuclear blackmail, even in a world where we face two other major nuclear-armed powers. And we will test nuclear weapons and nuclear delivery systems on an equal basis as others. Finally, the department's activities throughout the Western Hemisphere aren't just about killing narco-terrorists, they're also about deterring and defending our nation's instance against other threats in the hemisphere. To that end, the department will always provide the president with credible options when needed. That includes guaranteeing U.S. military and commercial access to key terrain, like the Panama Canal, the Caribbean, the Gulf of America, the Arctic, and Greenland. In all instances, we stand ready to work in good faith with our neighbors, but they must do their part to defend shared interests. Where they do not, the War Department stands ready to take focused and decisive action that advances U.S. interests. This is the Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine, recently codified so clearly in the National Security Strategy. After years of neglect, the United States will restore U.S. military dominance in the Western Hemisphere. We will use it to protect our homeland and access to key terrain throughout the region. We will also deny adversaries' ability to position forces or other threatening capabilities in our hemisphere. Past administrations perpetuated the belief that the Monroe Doctrine had expired. They were wrong. The Monroe Doctrine is in effect, and it is stronger than ever under the Trump corollary, a common-sense restoration of our power and prerogatives in this hemisphere, consistent with U.S. interests. The second line of effort for the War Department is deterrence against China, through strength, not through confrontation. Under President Trump's leadership, relations between the United States and China are better and stronger than they've been in many years. President Trump and this administration seek a stable peace, fair trade, and respectful relations with China. In November, President Trump and President Xi reached a major breakthrough in trade, putting both nations on a strong economic pathway. Reciprocal state visits in 2026 provide the opportunity for even more progress. The War Department is committed to the same approach, opening a wider range of military-to-military communications with the People's Liberation Army, aimed at deconfliction and de-escalation. We laid the groundwork for this with our counterparts months ago at ASEAN in Malaysia, and will continue that work. This line of effort is based on flexible realism, not naivete, an approach aimed not at domination, but rather at a balance of power. A balance of power that will enable all of us, all countries, to enjoy a decent peace in an Indo-Pacific where trade flows openly and fairly, where we can all prosper and all interests are respected. That's the world that we seek in the Indo-Pacific, and that is what our approach is designed to produce. We will be strong, but not unnecessarily confrontational. To quote another great Republican president, we will speak softly and carry a big stick. As I said at Shangri-La earlier this year, we're not trying to strangle China's growth. We're not trying to dominate or humiliate them, nor are we trying to change the status quo over Taiwan. Our interests in the Indo-Pacific are significant, but also scoped and reasonable. This includes the ability for us, along with allies, to be postured strongly enough in the Indo-Pacific to balance China's growing power. This means ensuring none of our allies are vulnerable to sustained, successful military aggression. This is what we mean by deterrence in the Indo-Pacific. Not dominating China, but rather ensuring they do not have the ability to dominate us or our allies. It's common sense. In this vein, our role at the Department of War is essential. It's our job to make sure Beijing sees unquestionable U.S. military strength that, if necessary, can back up our national interests. Even as we make clear our peaceful intentions, we insist that, as a Pacific nation ourselves, China respect our long-standing interests in the Indo-Pacific. And not just insist, but maintain the manifest strength to underwrite it. This involves respecting the historic military buildup they are undertaking. Our department maintains a clear-eyed appreciation of how rapid, formidable, and holistic the military buildup has been. We take these capabilities seriously. It would be silly and frankly disrespectful not to. This approach requires focus, prioritization, and clarity of purpose. That's why we will ensure our military can, if God forbid necessary, project sustained capabilities along the First Island chain and throughout the Indo-Pacific. That means being so strong that aggression is not even considered, and that peace is preferred and preserved. This is deterrence by denial. It is our job to ensure that President Trump is always able to negotiate from a position of strength in order to sustain peace in the Indo-Pacific. This is not a pivot for tomorrow. It is a reality for today. And finally, our third line of effort is increasing burden sharing with U.S. allies around the world. Here again, many self-ascribed neo-Reaganites seem to have lost the plot. According to them, only the United States has the ability to provide for defense and deterrence in Europe, the Middle East, and the Indo-Pacific. According to them, if the United States doesn't do it, nobody will. In fact, according to some, America is actually better off subsidizing these allies' defenses, even if they're perfectly capable of doing more for themselves and our collective defense. That is, of course, patently ridiculous, not to mention insulting to our allies. It's actually vitally important for America's allies and partners to step up and do their part for our collective defense. This isn't just a matter of doing right by Americans who are rightfully frustrated by years of Allied free-riding. This is pragmatic. As we rightly prioritize our homeland, hemisphere, and the Indo-Pacific, threats persist in other regions, and our allies need to step up. And step up for real. Our allies in Europe face Russia. Iran has been set back by the president and Israel's actions, but remains a threat in the Middle East. And of course, North Korea looms on the Korean Peninsula. We must also prepare for the possibility of simultaneous threats in different regions. That doesn't mean we think such simultaneous action is likely or even necessarily inevitable, but it's something the Department of War must be prepared for. And the best way to prepare for this is not by pretending we can do everything or be everywhere, effectively handing a permission slip for our allies' laggardly defense efforts. This neo-Reaganite attitude led us to fritter away our soldiers' lives, our national resources, and our citizens' support in rudderless wars. Our approach is fundamentally different and in keeping with the noble tradition of President Reagan as well as Nixon and Eisenhower. We will actually, for real, get our allies and partners to step up and do their part. We will no longer tolerate free riding. President Trump has shown the way with his historic leadership that yielded the commitments at NATO's Hague Summit. There, NATO committed to spend 5% of GDP on defense, 3.5% on core military, and 1.5% on security-related investments, and pledged to take primary responsibility for Europe's conventional defense. Things most folks sitting here just 5 years ago would have thought completely impossible. We're now using this template to press our allies around the world to meet this new global standard the president has set. And it's working. First, there was Europe and Canada. And just last month, South Korea committed to spend 3.5% of GDP on core military spending and assume the leading role in the ROC's conventional defense. We are optimistic that other Indo-Pacific allies will follow suit. In a few years, thanks to President Trump's visionary leadership, we will have our allies, which include some of the wealthiest and most productive countries in the world, once again fielding combat-credible militaries and boasting revived defense industrial industries. This will form a powerful, shared defensive shield with well-armed allies around the world ready to defend themselves, their interests, and our collective interests. Real partnerships and alliances based on hard power, not just flags and fancy conferences based on theories and hot rhetoric. Our allies are not children. They're nations capable of doing far more for themselves than they have. And it's time they stand up, and they are. In fact, many of them are nations who have proud and powerful martial traditions of their own, and we should treat them that way. We can and should and must expect them to do their part exactly as President Trump has. Model allies that step up, like Israel, South Korea, Poland, increasingly Germany, the Baltics, and others, will receive our special favor. Allies that do not, allies that still fail to do their part for collective defense, will face consequences. President Trump, makes sense to me, likes helping countries that help themselves, and we feel the same way. That's the nature of partnerships rather than dependencies. It's what we owe our friends, and most importantly, what we owe the American people. This is a period of great consequence for our great republic. Our forefathers fought and won the Cold War, ushering in a unipolar moment during which America stood alone. It was a time of tremendous opportunity, well earned after a century marked by 2 world wars and a Cold War, always under a nuclear shadow. Well, as you know, that unipolar moment is over, and we have an opportunity to define what comes next. Under President Trump's leadership, that's exactly what we're doing. The Department of War, at the president's direction, is laser-focused on advancing America first, peace through strength, common sense efforts. We're reviving the warrior ethos, we are rebuilding our great military, and every day our warriors are reestablishing the deterrence that Joe Biden so foolishly gave away. We owe safety, freedom, and prosperity to the American people, and we will deliver. We will achieve peace through strength, which is what the American people voted for and what President Trump demands. And in doing this, we appeal to Almighty God, just as our forefathers did. George Washington, the founder of the War Department, appealed to God's providence during every step of our improbable revolution. On prayer, on bended knee, on the battlefield. Ronald Reagan did the same, appealing to heaven as the world hung in the balance. We do the same today, with Jesus Christ as our guide. May he grant us the wisdom to see what is right and the courage to do it. May God bless our warriors, and may God bless our great republic. Thank you.
Please welcome to the stage Mr. Lucas Tomlinson of Fox News.
Well, thank you for your remarks, Mr. Secretary, and for joining us here at the Reagan National Defense Forum. We are reminded, not only in your remarks, but all morning, about the Reagan Doctrine. That's peace through strength. Let's remind everybody here what fueled that strength, and that was defense spending that was roughly two times more than what the U.S. is spending today. My question to you, Mr. Secretary, should the U.S. be spending
'27. And all I can say today is the president is committed to ensuring that our services, our great companies, our industries have what is needed to what we say and we call rebuilding the arsenal of freedom. We need a revived defense industrial base. We need those capabilities. We need them yesterday. And so resource-wise, I think this room will be encouraged by what we'll see soon, but I don't want to get too ahead of it.
Because at the high mark of President Reagan, we were spending 6% of our GDP on defense. At the low mark of Jimmy Carter's presidency, we were spending 4.5% of GDP, and today it's about 3%. Do you think that number will go up?
I think that number is going up. I don't want to get in front of the president and his desire to properly shape what the budget should look like. But just reading the tea leaves, just watching it, he understands the threat better than anybody I've ever seen articulate and understand the threat, and that includes investment. He just needs to make sure, by the way, if you haven't met our Deputy Secretary, Steve Feinberg, he's the absolute best in the business. He understands how to drive budgets, how to drive change, and he and I, along with the chairman, Dan Kane in the front here, are absolutely shoulder to shoulder in the belief of representing the president exactly what we need to make sure we're at the proper level, and I believe it'll be going up.
Can you take us back to the September 2nd strike off the coast of Venezuela, the very first one when combat operations began in the Caribbean, and walk us through the timeline and your role in it, from mission planning, the operation, and the follow-on strikes?
Absolutely. So it took us a couple of weeks, almost a month, to develop, and I can't get into sources and methods and all of those things for obvious reasons, but you have to develop the intel picture and get an understanding of what you're looking at. And a lot of our assets, as I talked about in the speech, have been pointing 10,000 miles around on the other side of the world for a very long time. So once we got to the point where a strike was imminent, I had taken the decision responsibility up to my level. Not many military decisions should be made by the Secretary of War. I believe in deferring those decisions to local commanders as much as possible, but because of the strategic implications of the first few strikes, I wanted to hold that decision at my level. And the briefing that I received before that strike was extensive, exhaustive, I would say, as each one is since. On the military side, on the civilian side, lawyers, intel analysts, red teaming, every aspect. What do we know? What do we know about their affiliation? A lot of things I can't share in this room to give us the kind of confidence that we know where this is coming from, who's driving it, who's on it, what their intentions are, where it's all the details you need to strike a designated terrorist organization, which is an important thing to remember at the top of all this. The president has designated these as terror organizations, poisoning and threatening the American people, making them a target just like Al-Qaeda. So in that room, in that moment, it was, I can't even remember exactly how long it would have been, 20, 30 minutes of a preview of exactly what's going on. And my job was to say, execute or don't execute. So I was satisfied with the strike criteria, yes. Saw the strike itself, which all of you have seen. There was probably 30 or 40 minutes, is what I've been told, of dust, and it was on fire for a long time after that. I stayed for probably five minutes or so after, but ultimately at that point it was a tactical operation, and so I moved on to other things. I shouldn't be fighting tactics as the Secretary of War, so I moved on to other things. Later on, a couple hours later, I was told, hey, there had to be a reattack because there were a couple folks that could still be in the fight, access to radios, there was a link-up point of another potential boat, drugs were still there, they were actively interacting with them, had to take that reattack. I said, Roger, sounds good. From what I understood then and what I understand now, I fully support that strike. I would have made the same call myself. Those who were involved in 20 years of conflict in Iraq and Afghanistan or elsewhere know that reattacks and restrikes of combatants on the battlefield happen often. In this particular case, it was well within the authorities of Admiral Bradley, who's an incredible American, an American hero. And the 22 or 23 strikes since have followed the similar protocol of ensuring we meet the criteria. The decision's not at my level anymore. And then we take the strike.
Now, after Admiral Bradley's meetings on Capitol Hill with the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, President Trump said he would have no problem if the full video of the strike is released. When can we see that video? When will you release it?
We're reviewing it right now to make sure sources, methods, I mean, it's an ongoing operation, TTPs. We've got operators out there doing this right now, so whatever we were to decide to release, we'd have to be very responsible about. So we're reviewing that right now.
Did you at any time say that everybody on board should be killed?
Is anybody here from the Washington Post? I don't know where you get your sources, but they suck. Of course not. Anybody that's been in the Situation Room or they've been in the war room there, the Secretary's office, know you don't walk in and say, kill him. It's just patently ridiculous. It's meant to create a cartoon of me and the decisions that we make and how we make them. It's ridiculous. The chairman and Admiral Bradley and everybody shot it down immediately because anybody that knows that's not how things go. There's a very defined process, specific criteria, go, no go, yes, no, lawyers, intel analysts, everything, and then after that you simply say cleared hot or not.
And
so,
did you have a plan to deal with survivors?
There was protocol for dealing with survivors, but in that, and frankly, there was I don't know, 10 strikes later, there was a semi-submersible that I think folks here, meaning a submarine. You don't go fishing on a submarine full of drugs, and in that particular case, the first strike didn't take it out, and a couple guys jumped off and swam, from what I understand, a ways away. When we struck the submarine a second time, it sunk, and then you had two people that you had to go get, and we had the ability to go get them. We gave them back to their host countries. That's a story that's already been out in the public. So we didn't change our protocol. It was just a different circumstance. So what people think is cavalier or cowboy about it is the exact opposite. These are the most professional Americans going through specific processes about what they can and cannot do, understanding all the authorities, all the laws of war, all the capabilities, and applying it to deter our adversaries. And by the way, there aren't many people getting in boats right now running drugs, which is the whole point. We want to stop the poisoning of the American people. The catch and release program of the pat them on the head and release them so they can go back to the fight didn't work in Iraq and Afghanistan, and it's not going to work in the Caribbean. So we're putting them at the bottom of the Caribbean, which forces them to change the way they operate. and hopefully makes the American people safer in the process. Not hopefully, it will make the American people safer in the process.
So, Mr. Secretary, you will be releasing that full video.
We are reviewing it right now.
Is that a yes or no?
That is, the most important thing to me are the ongoing operations in the Caribbean with our folks that use bespoke capabilities, techniques, procedures in the process. I'm way more interested in protecting that than anything else. So we're reviewing the process and we'll see.
Let's move over to China, who now has the world's largest navy. For every 8 warships they're building each year, the United States is only building 1.8. They're building and modernizing their nuclear forces, building a nuclear triad. They're helping Russia build artillery, 300,000 rounds a month. The U.S. can only muster 40,000 rounds manufacture a month. How concerned are you about these numbers? Chinese shipbuilding is 230% greater than the United States' capability. How worried are you about that?
Well, we're obviously well aware of their historic military buildup. It's right in front of us, which the most important thing we can do is look inward and increase our urgency of ensuring we rebuild our defense industrial base in the Arsenal of Freedom. I mean, that's why we're crisscrossing the country. That's why we did an entire acquisitions, requirements, and foreign military sales overhaul. Not a reform, not a tinkering. Ask the folks that understand it, our folks that are doing it. This is a complete game change in how we deliver systems to the battlefield. We have to. We don't have time. Ultimately, we need to be able to field the best as quickly as possible. So we see it, we're aware, but we're also prudent in how we approach it, which is the way the president has approached it, and we'll do the same.
Speaking of time, we're running short, but I know the IG report cleared you with signal. If you had to do it again, would you have used it before combat operations?
I don't live with any regrets. It's not a healthy way to live. And I know exactly where my compass is on these troops, which is why you've seen, and same with the president, the revival of the spirit inside our military. If you spend, I would encourage some reporters here to spend some time with actual formations of units, Marines, soldiers out there, combat arms folks. The revival of the spirit, the desire to join and to re-enlist is at historic levels because they believe in the core of what the president's trying to do. They know he has their back. They know I have their back. Silly news stories peddled for months and months and months and months and months because you got to fill. I know something about filling cable news segments. You got to do it. Is not something I worry about or they worry about.
But when you were a young platoon leader in Iraq, would you have wanted any of your soldiers communicating your mission before leaving the wire?
I mean, Lucas, I had to use an AT&T payphone to call home for $1.99 a minute, and some contractor was ripping us off. So I would have liked anyway to actually communicate back home.
AI, a quick question on AI. Would you rather to see your soldiers, Marines on the front lines armed with more AI capability or have them replaced with autonomous systems?
I think it's going to be both. I mean, you watch the modern battlefield, it has to be both. A couple companies we visited yesterday and others I've seen, I mean, what AI is doing to 10, 100, 1,000x the speed of sensing, and everything we do on the modern battlefield is critical. But autonomy is, we see it in Ukraine, we see it elsewhere, we're learning from that, the Army's learning from that, is a huge part of the way of the future. So it's definitely going to be both.
Well, this number is flashing 0. One last question, a small one. Who's going to win next week?
Knows how to get another one in.
Army or Navy? Who are you going to be rooting for?
You know,
there we go. Heard that.
He's a Naval Academy grad. I know that. I'm not supposed to answer that question. If I was a good politician, I wouldn't answer that question. But I will say that the Marine Corps, of all the services, is the service that never wavered. When there was a lot of political prerogatives, a lot of nonsense in the space, the Marine Corps stood strong. So for this one, maybe not next one, for this one, I'm with Navy. How about that?
That's great. Well, thanks a lot.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, I got to go that way.
Okay.
Appreciate you, brother.
See you later. Good luck.
Thank you. You good?